Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead, where today we're going to do something that is quite unusual. Before we get to that, I just want to revisit Monday's Micro Moment, where I talked about how to stay safe in a heat wave. And many of us, millions of us, are right in the middle of heat warnings from the Weather Service. It is hotter here than Jim and I can remember in the 13 years that we have been here. We've had a couple of days at 109, which is remarkable. And I made a comment about Phoenix that some people are taking exception to. I need to clarify that I had read an article that said that it is predicted that Phoenix could go as high as 130. They have not been anywhere near that. They are, I believe, 18 days, which is a record, over 110 degrees, and they're setting records at 114. So that's bad enough. Death Valley recorded 128 degrees yesterday, and Furnace Creek is the hottest place on the planet, and that is in Death Valley. Record temperature there was 135 degrees way back. And so whether or not they hit that, I don't know. But regardless of any of that, it is hot, hot, hot. And so I'm wearing loose clothing. This is linen, it breathes, but it's wrinkly. And I don't care because I feel very cool in this big shirt that's very loose. Now, to what we're going to do today. We are going to bake a loaf of bread. We're going to experiment with attempting to bake a loaf of bread in a pillowcase. Well, why in the world would we want to do that? This goes directly to self-reliance, which is one of our 3 pillars of our channel. And the reason for that is this. Over the past, I would say, 2 months, since I published our bread book and we've been doing a lot with bread, I have had many, many questions that go something like this. Pam, is it possible to bake bread? And then they provide a way. Would it work to bake bread? And one said in a rocket stove using a Dutch oven. Well, I can tell you that I don't know. I can guess, but I have never done it. But more than that, what I am hoping is that we can understand a little bit better today the science of what happens when bread bakes and what you might set up in order to bake bread if needed. Now, this is just a total, it's not hypothetical because I'm actually going to do it, but I will do this one time in my life because I won't continue doing it. I have too many other ways that work. But I just want to share this with you because it's a little bit outlandish, and I don't know that we're going to be successful, but setting up an experiment with an unknown outcome is what scientists do, and you can do that as well. You can test your own theories. And what I say is when people ask me, well, can we do bread this way or that way, I say, I think you should try it. And I really do mean that. But let's talk about bread and what happens when you bake bread. I have a little loaf of bread here using our recipe that I made available to you on our website for baking bread in an air fryer. And it's not quite ready to go in the oven, but it will be shortly. So what happens when bread bakes? And this is what we need to understand. The yeast, of course, we probably all know that yeast produces a gas as it eats. And we provide a lot of food for yeast when we bake bread. There's sugar and there's flour, the starch is in flour. All of those things provide food for the yeast. The yeast begin to consume that and produce carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, the strands of gluten in the bread form little pockets, and those little pockets fill with air, causing the bread to rise. When we put a loaf of bread in the oven, that heat continues to stimulate the rising of the bread. It rises just a little bit, but pretty soon it gets so hot that it kills the yeast. And that needs to happen. The environment needs to be hot enough that it will kill the yeast. The next thing that happens is that the strands of gluten are then baked, solidified, so that they don't expand anymore. So the dough then gets done. Getting done means that everything is dried out and solidified inside the loaf of bread, creating that beautiful spongy crumb. Now, whether or not the bread gets brown is irrelevant. If those things happen, the bread gets done. It might be white on the outside or it might be brown. I saw a picture on a news feed of a woman in Texas who claimed that she baked her bread in her mailbox in Texas because it was so hot. Well, I don't know about that. I take her at face value. It came out beautifully browned. I don't think you can get a beautiful brown unless the temperature gets up inside whatever you're baking it in, around 300 to 350. When I use my sun oven, it gets up to 300 degrees, maybe 325, and still does not brown very well. So today's bread may or may not brown, but if it gets done, if the yeast is killed and if the gluten pockets, if the gluten solidifies and everything, the moisture is released, drying out the inside, the dough is baked, then we will be successful. So what do we need in order to bake bread? Well, we need a heat source. I'm going to use my hair dryer. Notice I have a rubber band right here. This is my old hair dryer. I have, in my lifetime, been through several hair dryers, probably like many of you. And generally, when a hair dryer quits working, it is in the middle of a critical moment for me. So I have learned now to keep a new one in a box ready to go in case the hair dryer that I'm using goes out. So I have one on standby, but this is my Old Faithful. Now, essentially, we're going to gather the pillowcase like this, put that rubber band around it, turn it on, blow up the pillowcase, but wait. In order to bake bread, that heat has to get all around the bread. That's why we use our ovens on a rack in the middle of an oven where it is completely surrounded by that heat. And all of the off-grid methods that I use do the very same thing. So we need a rack in the bottom of our pillowcase oven so that the heat can get under the bread and bake the bottom as well. So here's our setup. We're going to put the rack in. I'm going to move the rubber band up here a little bit and gather the pillowcase. And then fasten it with the rubber band to where the entire top is safely tucked in that rubber band. Okay, so now I know that I need to double the rubber band because it just fell right off. So this is what the experimenting is about. You experiment, need to do it this way. It needs to be on the hair dryer first, and then we gather it around. This is going to take 2 hands, obviously. Turn it on. And here's our oven. So let's see how hot it is. 133 and climbing. So is 133 degrees hot enough to do everything we need it to do? Oh, now it's 143. I don't imagine it's going to get higher than 200. That is my guess. It's 150 right now. So once our bread is done rising, I will bring you back. We'll get it in our oven and we'll set it to going. My guess is that it's going to take at least 2 hours and maybe longer. So we will see you now that we know what our setup is, just as soon as the bread is ready. Let me just check it. You know what? It's ready to go. So let's just do this. So I'm going to set it inside the pillowcase on the rack. so you can see it through the pillowcase. Then I'm going to gather the pillowcase together once again. All right, we have that. Let's turn it on. And we'll be back and check it along the way. So see you then. All right, it has been just a little over 2 hours, and I think we've gotten all we're going to get for this setup. So I cut a little slit. This is an old pillowcase. I cut a little slit in the side so that I could stick the thermometer in, and it is the bread is 172. That's what it's been for over an hour. So we are going to call it good, and we will see what this looks like. I can't really tell what it looks like just through that little peephole. Okay, this is what it looks like. I sort of suspect that it's not done in the middle, but we will find out. It's 170, but it's been 170 for an hour, so I am just not sure. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the rack out. Smells good. And we're going to tip the bread out on the rack. A little tiny browning right there. Now, notice how much it rose as it was baking, because the temperature was quite a bit lower than a hot oven, 350 oven. That yeast continued to work for a while and gave us this little spot right here, which is fine. Ooh, my countertop is really hot too. I ended up putting this down to protect the countertop. So I think we'll let it go for just a few minutes and then come back and we'll cut into it and we'll see what it looks like inside. So we'll be back after it has cooled for just a few minutes. All right, here we go. Knife in hand. Still very warm. It's soft, so this would just be like a piece of bread with a crust cut off. Wow, not too bad. Not too bad at all.
Move it back up again, please, for a little bit longer. There we go. Okay.
Not too bad at all. It's a little soft in the middle. So let's try a little bit. This is ghee. We have a video on how to make ghee from butter, so it will stay on your pantry shelf indefinitely without refrigeration. Tastes just like butter. And here is our raspberry peach jam that we did a video on last week. It is so good. This is our second jar of this. It turned out so good. Okay, here we go. Tastes just like bread. It's great. So let's cut in a little farther, see if it's done in the middle. This cold knife isn't good for the hot bread, of course. Okay, so it's starting to break down a little bit in the middle. But it is still really, really good. Not that you would ever want to do this, unless you want your kids to have a fun project to see if they can bake bread in a pillowcase. But the takeaway from this is, once you know the science of what happens when bread bakes and how to best bake it in some kind of an enclosure. Now the pillowcase I used was old, and it's important that the air go through the pillowcase so the pillowcase doesn't pop open or anything, so it pushes the air through the threads, and so there's constant hot air circulating in there, and there needs to be some kind of a rack so the hot air can get under, over, and around the entire loaf. You can bake a loaf of bread using all kinds of setups, and I think it would be really fun if people want to try different setups to do that and then report under this video how that worked out for them. I just think it would be fun crazy. So this was only to show you that you can bake bread in a whole lot of different ways. I don't recommend that this is one that we should add to our list. It was purely a demonstration. So thanks for joining me for this experiment, and we will see you soon for another video.